All right. So what exactly does it mean to think on your feet? To think on your feet means to react quickly, right? Especially when answers are um, required of you or questions are asked. If you are someone that can think on your feet, you can actually answer questions very well and on the spot as well. Okay, so the aim is for our children to think on their feet because they need to be quick problem solvers and they need to be able to, meet the demands of a very uncertain future that we have. So if they are relying on other people to think for them, they are likely not to, succeed in the future and even in today's context. Okay, so these are some of the reasons why it is important for children to think on their feet. For very practical reasons, we have in our local school system, we have the oral examinations, right? And the oral examinations require students to actually have conversations spontaneously on the spot with an examiner that is a stranger to them. So they would have never met this examiner and they would be asked to relate things about their personal experience to the stranger. Now imagine if the child is not able to think or the child is not able to respond quickly. What do you think is going to happen? Right? The child will most likely not be able to excel, or the child might even have a kind of a stage fright and not be able to respond well. So this is something that should be addressed now, right, for the oral examinations that your children will be taking in school. Now, other reasons include interviews. So some children, they come to my academy or their parents call me and they say, oh, my child has been given a DSA interview and I want you to train her or him, right? And sometimes it is not that the child is not able to answer questions, but maybe they are not able to answer questions on the spot because in an interview, you don't know what the interviewer will ask you, or you don't know what the person in charge is going to ask you. Same thing for job interviews, right? When I interview my teachers, I look for people who can actually think on the spot, who can improvise, who are sincere as well when they answer questions. So all this will not be possible if your child is not able to think on the spot. Okay, let me just look at the comments. Yeah, not prepared as well. That's right, Esther. Parents spoon feed too much. Okay, yes. Someone called YB said parents spoon feed too much, and absolutely, they are not able to think for themselves anymore, right? Okay, another thing is a question and answer section that is usually at the end of presentation. So, for example, for this presentation, I'll be asking you, do you have any questions, right? And when a child is faced with questions, sometimes it can be very intimidating. So I used to teach project work in a junior college in Singapore, and students would really fear this part of the presentation because although they have prepared their presentation very well, when people ask them questions about their topic, they may not be able to address the questions very well because they have not prepared for it, or maybe they have prepared another set of questions, and then when the question is thrown to them, they are lost. Right? So this is another thing that can be a stumbling block for children to succeed. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, when it comes to solving problems in school and at the workplace, teachers and parents will not be able to be by their children's side, right? So when you are not there to guide your child, how are they going to think? How are they going to solve problems? So I'm sure many of you have encountered this before, where your children may be too dependent or reliant on you to solve problems for them instead of thinking for themselves how they can solve the problems, right? But this is going to change very soon. So the first tip that I have for you is to actually provide a safe space for children to think. Now, we hear safe space a lot, right? What does safe space actually mean in this context? This means that the child cannot be afraid. So when the child wants to express an opinion or an idea, they know that this idea or this opinion will actually be acknowledged. Okay, children hate it when you dismiss them or you tell them that, no, this is not the way to do it. So even if what they are thinking is different from the way that you are thinking, you have to acknowledge and say that, okay, I acknowledge your opinion, or yes, that is your opinion, and you have to listen to what they are saying. Again, children love to be listened to, at least most children, right? So if they feel that they cannot articulate their opinions or they will be shot down, then it is not a safe space. Okay, so another part of ensuring a safe space is to let them know that it's okay to have differing viewpoints. That means everybody, even if you're in the same family or even if you're in the same class, you might always think differently, and that is okay. All right, so how do we do this, or how do we prepare a safe space for our children, both at home and in school? Now, this is an activity that we do. A lot of times we do this in drama class, and it's called hot seating. But I find that this is actually a very good activity if you want to teach your child differing viewpoints or differing opinions. Excuse me. So, for example, if there is an issue that you want your child to think about, you can ask him or her to pretend to be the ruler of the country, or someone else can be the rich citizen and someone else can be the poor citizen, right? So they adopt the viewpoint of that particular person and they think like how that person would think. So obviously the ruler is going to think very differently from a citizen of a country, right? So you put them on the hot seat, meaning that you can ask them questions and they have to answer in the viewpoint of any of these parties. So if they ask you, or if you ask them a question as a ruler, you can see what their answer would be, and then you can change it and you can ask them to maybe adopt the viewpoint of a rich citizen. So this hot seating activity has a lot of uses. It helps the child to think about how different people might have different opinions, right? And at the same time, they are open to listening to other opinions as well to broaden their mindset. It is important that when you do an activity like this, you have to establish that no opinions are wrong, right? There are better opinions, there might be worse opinions, but all opinions, as long as they can be justified, are valid. So this is something that you can try, even in your own household with your children, so that they become more flexible in the way that they think about issues. This works well with characterization also when you're teaching your child to write about different characters. Okay, now the other way that you can establish a safe space is through your words. Words are actually very powerful, as you would agree with me, I'm sure. So children pick up a lot of things from conversations as well. So when you speak to them, you have to adopt a tone that is accepting, and you have to show them that you want to hear what they have to say. So these are some ways to kind of switch the conversation. If they say something and you tell them, "Are you sure?" it raises doubt, right? It shows that you doubt what they are saying. So instead of doubting them or showing that you are doubting them, you can say, "Really? Tell me more." And then they are allowed to elaborate. They are allowed to explain why they believe something is so. Okay. The other one is when a child says something like, "Oh, I can fly into space," for example. Many times our adult mind, because we are so logical, we will just say, "No, that's not true," or "No, it can't be," right? But maybe the child is thinking about something else, or the child has an explanation for why he or she said that. So you can say, "That's interesting. Why do you say so?" So again, it's the why question, right? Or asking the child to elaborate, to listen to the reasoning and the thinking process of the child. Okay, the other thing that is very limiting is it should be like this. So when we try to teach children the right way to think, then they will just end up thinking like us, or they would have a very limited perspective of the world. So instead of saying it should be like this, you can change it to a question. What do you think? So after giving your opinion, you say, what do you think? Okay. And if the child's explanation is not very clear, right? Again, you cannot say, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't understand what you're saying, because that might demoralize the child. But instead, maybe you can get the child to clarify. So can you give me an example to show me what you are saying? And then again, you practice active listening. Active listening is when you really listen so that you can understand, instead of listening to argue or listening to just respond. Okay, so changing your conversation and changing the tone that you adopt can actually help the child very much. Okay, the second tip that I have for you is actually about mistakes. So I think just now in the chat box, some of you typed out why children are afraid of thinking, or why they do not think for themselves. And one of these reasons would be mistakes. They are afraid of mistakes. But what if you change that thinking, or you give them a different perspective and you say that mistakes are actually stepping stones, right? Instead of making them afraid of making mistakes, you can say it is not the mistake that matters, it is what you do after the mistake. Okay, so if you tell the child that, and if the child grows up thinking mistakes are not the be all and end all, I can make mistakes but I can learn from them, they will stop fearing the wrong answers, but they will be encouraged to try new things. And this is something that your child has to do. If you want your child to be a thinker, your child will have to, embrace mistakes as part of the journey, and they have to always be willing to try something new. Okay, so what can you do if a child makes mistakes, right? Maybe, let me give you an example. If your child makes grammar mistakes, or your child makes spelling mistakes in the composition, or in any of the work that he or she is doing, what can you do? You can encourage the child to actually identify these mistakes that they are making instead of immediately pointing out the mistake to them. So when a child makes a mistake, don't panic, right? Just calm down and say, what do you think might be wrong with this? Or do you see any areas that you have made mistakes? How can you correct them? So learning to correct mistakes is more important than being penalized for them. So very often in our school system, once a child makes a mistake, or once a child gets a low grade, that's it, right? Let's send them for tuition. Let's teach them, or let's punish them. Let's make them write that over and over again. No, that's not the way. The way is, how can you identify the mistakes and how can you help them to correct the mistakes by themselves? Okay, so let me give you an example of how we do this at ASA. So let's say we have 3 sentences, and obviously there are mistakes in these 3 sentences, right? As adults, maybe we can spot the mistakes already, okay? Okay, so let's be a little bit more interactive now. What mistakes can you identify here? Can you type in the chat box? Yes, apply. 2 and 2, good. Clinic. What about the second one? What's wrong with the second one? Yes, tense errors, okay? So these are very common mistakes that children make when they write. Spelling mistakes, okay? Instead of writing I, they write Y, right? So what we will do is we will actually, instead of saying, oh, you made a mistake for clinic, it's a wrong spelling, and write the word clinic on top, what we will do is we will just underline. Okay? And then we will say, what is wrong, what are the mistakes that are apparent for the words that are underlined. And then they will correct it on top. So something like this, right? Okay, now there's a very good question from Shamini who asks, what if you know that the child is making the mistake on purpose, right? Or the same mistake is made over and over again. What do you do? So then you don't even have to underline the mistakes. You just have to say, okay, you've made this mistake a couple of times. Can you spot it? Okay, so instead of underlining, you just tell them, can you spot your mistakes or not? You've made this a couple of times. Okay, and then see what they respond and see how they go about it. Many times, the children will be able to identify the mistakes by themselves. So when they can identify the mistakes by themselves, you know that they know the correct answer, right? Now, what if they can't see their mistakes genuinely? Okay, if they can't see their mistakes genuinely, you can point it out to them. But after pointing out the mistake to them, what you need to do is you need to give them a chance to apply the correct thing. So for example, if a child is still learning how to write, and of course, spelling is not one of the strongest points, right? Usually when children first begin writing, their spelling may not be right all the time. That's fine, okay? You can show them how the spelling should be, or you can use the dictionary, go through the correct spelling with them, and then straight away after that, you get them to apply the correct spelling. So you say, okay, this is the way it should be spelled. Now, can you make another sentence using the correct spelling? So when they apply it straight away, the neural connections in their brain kind of register that, oh, this is the way it should be, right? And then, if you see it happening again, you can remind them of the time that they made that sentence with the new spelling. So that, again, they are reminded. So sometimes children need a bit of reminders, but it's not because they are always making the mistakes deliberately. Sometimes they need a bit of reminders or a bit of help in terms of identifying, and then eventually they'll be able to identify the mistakes by themselves before they show you the work or before they hand in the work. Okay? Any other questions about these mistakes? Okay, if not, let me go on to the next one. So the two questions that you can always ask your child over and over again, instead of saying, this is wrong, can you correct it now? Okay, you can say, what do you think could be wrong with this? Maybe you can tell me what the mistake is, and how do you think you would correct it? So give the child a chance. Even if it's spelling or even if it's a tense errors, give the child a chance to evaluate for himself or herself. Okay, and when children are able to do this and they do it correctly, right, they do it right, acknowledge them, give them the praise that they deserve, and say that, okay, good, now you have identified the mistake by yourself, you don't need me to tell you where the mistake is. So this applies in not just writing, but in other subjects as well, because the purpose of this is to get them to always be their own editors, or to always be self-aware when they do work. Because sometimes, you know, when children have too much homework or they are bombarded by too many tasks, they'll just do it for the sake of doing it, right? But they are not fully present, or they are not self-aware about what they are actually doing. And that's when, you know, they become careless, or they don't really care about the mistakes that they are making, or they don't really care about handing in their best work. But if you give them something to look forward to and to evaluate themselves, they will take ownership of their learning. Of course, this is a process. It doesn't come straight away, but it is a habit that is very good to imbue in your children from young. Okay. So the next one is asking questions. And this is something that I always tell my students as well, that sometimes asking questions is actually more important than finding the right answers. So why is this the case? Because questions are evidence that the child is thinking. If a child doesn't ask any question at all, then the child is not thinking, or the child is not practicing, thinking, right? So in order to know that a child is thinking or what the child is thinking, they have to ask questions. Sometimes, as adults, we might be a bit impatient when it comes to this. We might think, why is my child asking all these questions? Isn't it obvious? Haven't I already explained it? Why is my child asking these questions? But it becomes very dangerous, because when you stop or when you dismiss the child's questions, then he or she will not, want to ask anymore, right? Or he or she will think that asking questions is a negative thing or it's bad, right? But if you practice this with your child and you ask questions and you tell your child that you don't know all the answers as well, but maybe you'll find out, with them, or encourage them to find the answers to their questions, then it becomes a practice that is very healthy. Okay, so what kind of questions can you start asking your child, or how can you guide your child to ask the right questions? So for the purpose of this webinar, I've just identified two broad categories, right? And within the second broad category, I've broken it down into basic and higher order questions. So the first type is the yes or no question, right? We want to try to avoid this as much as possible when we are training our child to think. It's not that you can't ask any yes or no questions, but you also have to supplement it with open-ended questions. So when we are teaching writing, for example, we have two types of questions, right? The basic kind, which is the 4 W's. Okay, and we always teach our children, when you write your introduction, you answer the questions who, what, when, and where, right? But to go deeper, you have to ask the how, the why, and the so what questions. So even in your conversations, right, not just when they are writing or when they are doing their schoolwork, they should be asking how, why, and so what. Because this is another tier, or this is another level of questioning. So get them into the practice of asking these higher order questions. Okay, let me show you an example of how the questions can be asked. So the why is to provide a reason. The how is to show a method or a way of doing things or the process. And the so what is to show the consequence, whether it is a negative consequence or whether it's a positive consequence, right? So let's say that you show your child this picture, right? And how can you apply these different levels of questions? Basically, you can start with the what first, right? What is the boy doing in the picture? Okay, so then the child will respond about what the boy is doing, the action of the boy. And then you can go to the next level, which is the why, right? So why do you think he's walking towards the sea? And then the child provides a possible reason or a possible explanation for the child's actions in the picture, right? Then how is he doing it? So although it is not a moving picture, you get the child to think about process, you get the child to think about reason, right? So when the child is describing the how, you can use this opportunity to teach new vocabulary as well, right? Like slowly, gingerly, and then pondering. Okay, so what is the character thinking? And then the last question is the so what question, all right? Which is usually tied to like a certain theme or a certain idea. So if you look at this picture, what kind of idea or concept comes about? Maybe perseverance, because you can look at the rocks like all these stumbling blocks. So if you are able to get past the rocks and you persevere, you will get the reward or you will get what is good at the other side. Okay, so this can be done for pictures. It can also be done for newspaper articles or magazine articles. If you're discussing this with your child, try to apply the what, why, how, so what questions. More for the why, how, and so what, because this shows higher order thinking skills. You can also use this for paragraph development. So if your child is writing a compo, always ask why the character is doing this, how is the character doing it, or how is the character feeling, and what is the result of the character doing this. So if you do this for every paragraph, you can see that your child's ideas also become more developed. And they only have to remember 3 questions, right? Why, how, and so what? Why, how, and so what? If they keep answering these questions by themselves, they start to develop that habit of thinking without you having to prompt them or without the teacher having to prompt them as well. Okay? So let's put into practice what I have shown you. If you look at this, do you know where this is? Where in the world is this? Can you type in the chat box? Where is this picture taken? Any guesses? Tokyo, Shibuya, Japan. Yes. Okay, so this is actually the famous Shibuya crossing, right? Okay, what kind of questions would you ask your child if your child is looking at this or if you're showing this picture to your child? How can you phrase a question for your child? Let me know what you think of in the chat box. Okay, I'll give you an example first in the chat box. Okay, so I would ask, why are the streets so populated? Okay, this is one question that I would ask a child who's looking at this or who is having a discussion about this picture. What other questions can we ask? Can we apply the how? Yes, Rihanna, where do you think this is a question that you can ask as well. How do we apply the how and the so what questions? Anyone? What else can we ask about this particular picture? Okay, let me give you another example of, okay, Esther has said, how do you think this crossing works? Yes, good. All right, so then you get the child to explain the process. Is there a process in place? Okay, how do you think people can cross over safely? Yes, that's right, Shamini. Okay, So again, you get the child to think about different permutations of the answers because there's no one right answer, right? Okay, how do we phrase a so what question? Okay, this is an example. So what do you think might happen if people don't follow the traffic rules? Okay, so what? What is the consequence of this? What if they can't follow the traffic rules? What do you think might happen? So this is about like conjecturing or, giving a speculation, but making sure that the speculation is also reasonable, right? When they look at what is happening in the picture. Any other suggestions for so what? So what do you think is the government's purpose of constructing the roads in this manner? Okay, that's another consequence question that we could ask our children as well. So again, it doesn't matter whether they know anything about Shibuya, right? But it matters how they craft the questions because it reflects what they are thinking about when they look at this picture. Okay, so these are some questions that you can practice over and over again with your child that it becomes natural, it becomes commonplace. Okay, I'm going to talk a bit about habits of thinking. So when I was in Harvard, I learned about the process of making thinking visible, which means that we always want to give our children the tools or empower our children to actually spell out their thinking process, not just for us to see whether what they are thinking is good or coherent, but it's also for them to express how they are thinking. So we give them a kind of a structure. Now, this could be done in a variety of ways, okay? It doesn't just need to be in writing. Some children like to draw diagrams. So if your child is more of a visual learner, you can actually help the child by drawing diagrams in terms of a step-by-step process that is taking place. Okay, other people or other children, they love speaking. So they can actually verbalize their thought process to you using a few different steps. So I'm going to show you what I call thinking routines now. So thinking routines, there are many thinking routines, but I really like the ones from Project Zero. Okay, so I left the QR code here. If you like, you can scan the QR code and you can actually visit this site. It's an organization in Harvard, HESC, where I graduated, and they come up with simple thinking routines to help children, both in the classroom and outside of the classroom, to structure their thinking. So it's only 3 questions, so it's very easy to remember. Okay, parents can do this as well. So the most basic one, and some of you would have been exposed to this, or your children might have been exposed to this, is the I see, I think, I wonder. Okay, so this routine can be again used for observation, to see what your child really thinks about what is going around your child, what is going on in the world, right? And it can be applied to a variety of media as well. Okay, so same thing if you're maybe doing comprehension with your child and you want your child to pick out certain things from the comprehension passage that is very important. Okay, you can use the I see, I think, I wonder routine. The other one is the claim and support question routine. Okay, so again, it's 3 steps. This one is more for, I would say, older children who are constructing arguments. Okay, so they make a claim about a particular topic and then they try to justify it with evidence and then they ask a question about that claim. Okay, so I'm going to demonstrate how these 2 routines can be used. And like I said, they can be used from, ages 6, some younger, even 5, all the way till, you're 90 or, you can think coherently. So let's say we have this picture. So this picture, I often use it for children who are younger because they love fantasy things, right? So if I do the see, think, wonder, it will be something like this. I see many creatures around, or I see many fantastical creatures in this picture. Okay, now what do I think about these creatures? I think that they are roaming around freely, and they do not feel restricted. Okay, I wonder where this fantastical place is, or does it appear in a book? So it's the see, the think, and the wonder. What do you see? What do you wonder about what you see? And what do you think about what you see? Okay. The second routine is claim support question. So this one, older children will be better. So there's a claim that needs to be made. This belongs in a world that is outside of Earth. That is the claim. Okay, how do you support your claim? The second is support, right? So what is the evidence? The evidence is that there are houses that are suspended in the sky. Okay, and the question you would ask could be, how do these houses stay suspended in the sky? All right, so again, there may not be a concrete answer to the question, but you can always encourage your child to think further about the question or to come up with possible answers to that question as well. Okay, so just to recap, it's see, think, wonder, and claim support question. Okay, hang on, there's a chat. Less gravity compared to Earth. Yeah, that's a possible reason as well. Okay, so you can see that, your children are thinking of possible reasons to support their claim, and that is moving towards higher order thinking instead of just saying something but you can't justify it. All right. Okay. The last tip that I have for you is that it's not always black and white, right? Although we want our children to, be able to see things simplistically, sometimes it is not. So I'm using this picture as a demonstration of that. If you look at this picture, if you only see black and white, you will miss out on all the other colors that is in this picture, right? So you should always encourage children to pick up on the fine details, or what we call the nuances, instead of polarizing. Polarizing means that it's either like this or it's like that. In life, it's not, right? There's always in between. So encourage your child to look at the in between, identify different aspects of something, whether it's a picture or whether it's an argument. And if they say it depends, when you ask them a question, it is actually valid. Okay, so don't shut them down if you say, or if they say it depends. Ask them to explain. Depends on what? What are the situations that you can think of that this depends on this? Okay, so let me give you an example of what you could do with your children at home. And this is done in school as well sometimes, right? It can also train the speaking skills of students. So let's say the question is, students should not have to wear uniforms to school. Do you agree? All right. And of course, your children will have many, many different opinions about this, right? So how do you structure this? You can have the proposition and the opposition. Okay, you can write this out on the board, or you can write it on paper. So ask your child to choose one side. Proposition is they agree with the statement. Opposition is they disagree. Okay, and when they say they agree or when they say they disagree, they must have different reasons for this. So what you can do is then you can switch sides so that they can do both the proposition and the opposition, so that they can think about different arguments that can be raised around a topic like this. So keep it light, keep it fun at first, and then as you go along and your children become deeper thinkers, you can actually use maybe more controversial debate topics, okay, or more mature debate topics as well, so that they are able to see both sides of the coin.